Last time we were hitting some of the main ancient sites around the city of Rome. That's definitely worth a catch up first to get you up to speed. We already said that this is neither designed to be your ultimate, most definitive guide to the city. In fact, kind of the opposite, as we were attempting to do the trip on a budget, so no high-end dining. Nor is it attempting to be exhaustive on the historical site. We hit as much as we could, and as I've been scrolling up and down the over 3,000 shots we took, I'm pretty proud of how much we managed. But this time around, as well as some stuff still remaining from the city, we're also going a little outside the core of Rome to see some stuff that's in the near orbit of the city. So, jumping back in on day 3, now you might not think of Rome as a walled city. It's not really famous for it in the way that Avignon or Dubrovnik are, but the Aurelian Walls are a very enjoyable walk, the southwest portion at least, and remarkably shady in the afternoon. Now, this was turning into quite a long stretch. Again, this is not a big tourist trap. We saw almost no one. There's barely even any cars coming through this way. We eventually circled round to this. Yes, Rome has a pyramid. Just outside the San Paolo gate, it's 37 meters tall and around 2.5 millennia newer than the pyramids at Giza, but as a tangible reminder of the Egyptophiles in Rome, it's pretty impressive. We attempted to navigate the metro back with limited success. You might know this by reputation, but the Rome Metro project has been troubled. Thessaloniki has encountered much the same problem. When you're obliged to dig in areas that are so archaeologically sensitive, it might as well just be a wooden floor made entirely out of pieces of the true cross. And if this is everything that survived above ground, like below, it's probably enough to fill 100 museums about 100 times over. In practice, this means Rome has a big gap right in the centre where both all the good ruins are and accordingly where everyone is trying to go. So you might be lucky and need to get between 2 points that actually are connected by the limited lines. In our case, it seemed like the whole red line was just closed anyway, so we only got part way round. Well, we dipped back to the cool of the apartment for a breather, and then in the late afternoon, as part of visiting Rome, it's not surprising if you temporarily visit another country. Yes, everyone's favourite microstate, with a healthy dose of, wait, how did this come around? So after traversing this deceptively large avenue, you need to go through sort of airport-style scanners on your way in, which makes the queues kind of back up a bit. And then we managed this fantastic blunder. In an attempt to see something else first, we fell afoul of the strict one way, where they won't even let you take just like 10 paces back the way you came. So we ended up in the rather laughable position of having to go around again, like back through the scanners again. And thankfully, because it was getting into the evening, it got a bit quieter. Anyway, had a look inside St. Paul's. I've always been quite forthcoming that Baroque architecture just isn't really my scene, so with a couple of exceptions, our areas of interest begin at about 800 years ago and go back further from there. So it's going to come as a little surprise that this doesn't hugely do it for me in the first place, but, well, to keep this simple, and I don't know if you know anything about me, I've been a Christian all my life, and can we just be clear, this is not what Christianity is about. Like, at all. Like, what? Hoarding wealth like a dragon? Like, investing all your time and effort into vanity projects? It's all just the 100% opposite of the message of the New Testament. Like, you want to tell me that the Galilean carpenter who became nothing, who washed people's feet, who declared he had come to serve, not to be served, who specifically irked the religious by hanging out with the sinners, the lepers, the tax collectors, you're telling me he would have turned around and said, now, build massive vanity projects to commemorate me and don't spare the marble and the gold. So, you'll pardon me if, rather than being transfixed in reverential awe at St. Peter's Basilica, I was a little salty about the whole thing. Missing the point of Christianity this hard, it's really quite something. I'm not being boorish or doing this for a joke. Can we be strictly biblical about this? Like, how? How do you square all of Jesus' commands to both take care of the least and, in fact, become the least with this? You can't. It has no resemblance to biblical Christianity. It is, in fact, diametrically opposed to it. And I realise this all might sound odd, since you've seen me get very granular and nerdy about various aspects of church architecture and design. I mean, for me, I'm there for the historical details, sure, but not because this actually makes for a good expression of church. Over the centuries, places of worship have usually taken the highest priority for time and artistic effort, but also building materials. Hence, while much was being built out of wood and thus lost, the churches and their artistic components have survived, where the more prosaic structures made of not stone have not. So, for personal curiosity, dipping into Vatican City was interesting, for sure, but colour me less than enthused about the whole thing. And look, since we've already got some people's backs up, we didn't want to go through the general crush and cost that's involved with going through to see all the art stuff in the Sistine Chapel. I'm not down on art, Renaissance or otherwise. It's just kind of like a low priority for us. Plus, the Sistine Chapel, you cannot take pictures in there, and it's very high up. You honestly are better going to Wikimedia Commons and seeing the close-up images there. Really. So look, regards Vatican City, pardon me for not fawning over this particular sacred cow, but we had a reformation for a reason. And part of the reason was all the indulgences that were sold to vulnerable people to fund this. Okay, day 4. Allowed myself a not crack of dawn start. In fact, just took a stroll round the corner to get a cappuccino. I know, it must be going soft. Okay, very first thing, was very pleased to see this one, the Ara Passis, or Altar of Peace. It's a partially reassembled altar that was commissioned during the reign of Augustus, and it's quite remarkable for its marble friezes. There's also an enjoyable museum in the basement. Then popped in on the surviving ruins at the edge of the Piazza Navona. We'd had to go through this square almost every day, but somewhat below street level are the fragments of the original structure of Domitian's Stadium. Well, Jen was more than content to be taking it easy out of the heat, so I got on a couple of buses to get me out of the city, kind of to the southeast, and out to, I think the neighbourhood is called the Quadraro, but that's not terribly relevant. What is relevant is all of the Roman aqueducts crisscrossing the area. This makes for an interesting afternoon because while, you'll have to walk for it, in this open area you get to witness the engineering marvel of how Rome supplied its citizens with water. It feels redundant at this point to go too far into which sections are where. There's also a big segment in the city with the remains of aqueducts crisscrossing roads and all sorts, but aqueducts are curious things. If there's even just a couple of spans remaining, they stand as a significant chunk of the civilization that made them some 2,000-ish years ago. Yet it's a reminder that civilization, or go on, let's say, living comfortably, as we currently do, is a slender thread. An aqueduct with a single span missing, it ceases to perform its function if even just 1 yard is disrupted, as of course many, barring just one, were. And we are not immune from this same calamity. Our comfortable existence where we can take time to watch YouTube videos is only possible thanks to, apart from the broadband providers, it's possible because we have sewage and we're not having to concern ourselves with pooping somewhere away from our sleeping holes and or water supply or municipal refuse collection. You can bet that the first thing future archaeologists will be digging up after the nuclear bombs drop will be piles of refuse, uncollected or perhaps burnt. Just know that these are things that are by no means guaranteed. Okay, that was probably a bit too much introspection there, sorry. As I was saying, having a great afternoon following the trail of the aqueduct, even if I was sweating doing it. This had turned into one of the hottest afternoons, and while I was having a great time, I likely also stank from the rivers of perspiration emanating from my person. The trail I took was essentially here to about here, which is definitely not everything, but it's a reasonably good start in terms of the parks and open spaces that house Rome's aqueducts. Having done a pretty wide arc, I linked back to the train network at Campanelle and back together with Jen, and not content for just one unbelievable bath complex with the Caracalla baths the day before, we stopped in on the baths of Diocletian, which also house a museum. These have been, for the most part, patched up a lot better than the baths of Caracalla. They've popped some roofs back on them. It's a massive complex. So that's pretty great. Took a walk back catching the Basilica of St Mary Major, although despite its early origin, it sure is hiding it well. Back past the amphitheatre and strolling past the forums. It got to the night of day 4, and despite having been very, very focused on all things Rome for the last 72 hours, I had a sad feeling like I'd barely just got here. I mean, that's how these things go, I guess. Dinner in the evening was fine, but not great. I took no footage. I wanted to get a little bit more of a sense of the historic centre at night. Jogged for a bit and discovered it is still very hot, even after dark. Got a few nice nighttime views of the amphitheatre. Well, morning of day 5, and this was when we decided, to be honest, more like managed to book amphitheatre tickets. I normally scoff at the skip the line tier, as paying a premium for a vanishingly small quantity of time seems idiotic. But in this very specific instance, queues getting about 2 hours deep in peak season, this was a solid move. And likewise, getting in first thing before it became too busy, it was still pretty busy, but it was at least in the cooler portion of the day. And early on, I was referring to it as the Flavian Amphitheatre, and that is technically a more correct title, as despite popular culture being more than happy to call this the Colloseum was actually the name given to a gigantic statue of Nero that was constructed in this area, now long gone. Heroic nudity is perhaps one of the things about the ancient world that we struggle to relate to the most. The fact that an all-powerful hegemon would consider it a good thing to have a naked statue of themselves in the centre of the city. Though that said, I feel like Trump would also be quite keen for similar, just the rolls of rotting orange flesh and hanging dong right there in the middle of Washington. Yeah, that seems quite on brand. So yes, the technically correct name is the Flavian Amphitheatre. But are you really ready to be the tedious person at the dinner party when bringing that up? Technically, it's not the Colosseum. It's got to be an all-time favourite, coupled with the fact that Stonehenge doesn't technically fit inside our definition of a henge. So yes, have fun alienating friends and partners of friends with these pedantic semantic observations. I don't know if I need to tell you that much about the amphitheatre here. It's a uniquely extraordinary place to be. Our tour guide was doing a reasonable job of keeping the group apprised. Truthfully, this is a bit of a funny side story for us, though less so at the time. Because entry is not cheap, it puts quite a lot of pressure on this day to really make the most. However, Jen was most certainly not feeling her best. Guides and on-site medics are quite accustomed to people fainting in the heat, but it was only just past 9 a.m. and we'd been standing in the shade virtually the entire time. And Jen was very much worse for wear, at a couple of points close to blacking out. There were massive big ups to the Canadian lady who took pity on us and donated Jen a protein bar. The funny thing about this, with the benefit of hindsight, the real reason Jen was feeling so sketchy was this was the very first week or so of this squeezable weasel making himself at home. This was not information we were party to at the time, so it was only afterwards we were able to piece together what the sudden, overwhelming nausea actually was. And of course, this somewhat betrays our episode backlog, because our son is now closing in on about a year old and doing great. So yeah, look, we're still on catch-up mode, but hey, most of what we're pointing the camera at has been there 2,000-ish years. It's not going to make too much difference if you have to wait 18 months or so for us to talk about it. Well, after the amphitheatre, and thankfully not passing out, our ticket also included entry back into the forum, and it was nice to get some additional shots from our previous visit as well. There's just so much there, but the summer heat was building, and that enacted a greater toll the longer you stood in it. Well, we went back to check out from our apartment. It served us pretty well. We mentioned last time it was just kind of around the corner from Fort St. Angelo. As a jumping off point, something a little closer to the ancient stuff would have been handy, but, also quite a bit more expensive. I don't know, I think we struck the balance about right. Our exodus from the city of Rome was hot and extremely sweaty, and I didn't bother to film much of it. The buses were an increasingly full sweatbox that resembled a refugee crisis by the time we got to the metro. The metro, on the other hand, was air-conned and spacious and generally pleasant, and on just a single €1.50 travel pass, we got all the way across Rome and out to Ostia. Now, this is an interesting setup because Rome is notably inland, but a fairly easy metro journey later, and you can be by the beach. Not hard to see why that's an appealing pitch. And yet, Jenna decides to treat us to a nicer than usual spot to stay in, to relax after all the ruins chasing of the last 5 days. It was nice, and the pace of Ostia, the town, vastly different. It is one of those things I struggle to get used to as a Brit, the fact that most of the ample beach here is private and requires an entrance fee. That seems about as alien as paying for tap water or just the air you breathe. Private beaches in the UK are quite the rarity, long may that continue. There are these slithers of free bits that are, no shock, overcrowded and not very well kept, with everyone who just didn't feel inclined to pay 5, 7 or even upwards of €10 for something that in many other countries would simply be free. Well, anyway, caught the sundown after a pretty nice dinner. And this was more or less a chance for us to unwind a bit, but the next morning, a short way away, to be clear, Ostia is really two things. It's a beach within a half an hour of the capital, but also the location of a vast ancient Roman site, entirely comparable in scale to Pompeii. Yeah, I mean, this is easily in the top 5 of the best Roman sites that survived anywhere. In antiquity, Ostia was the main port of Rome. It's where the Tiber meets the sea. I'm not going to devote a huge amount of time to it here. One day when we get to do our Roman episodes, we'll properly unpick all of what's going on. I probably should have flagged this a bit sooner, but while we're currently still making travel episodes, we get all our history content filmed, we frequently go into far more depth on our Bluesky account, where we're posting threads on all sorts of historical details. If you're catching this shortly after release and want to see more from Ostia, head to our Bluesky and you'll find more there. And from there, a bit of beach time, and then other than just making sure we got the right bus to the airport, that was us out. Yet this was one of the most special summer trips we've ever done. Yes, we had to work for it and walk for it and sweat it out. But wow, was it incredible to do. It had its quirks. Most of all, the presence of that cocktail stick required to keep filming, but if nothing else, just remembering being here for the first time ever and just how amazing that felt. I'll admit, I was surprised in the area around the Forum. So I'd read about the new rules introduced, for example, like sitting on the Spanish steps, and while I understand the rationale entirely, it was like, oh wow, they're really cracking down. You saw police cars slowly circling in all the main tourist areas, which, to be honest, because of the perennial warnings of pickpockets, are somewhat welcome. But then you walk the road between the Vittorio Emanuele monument and the Colloseum, and suddenly it's like anything goes. Especially the bar for buskers was weirdly low. I don't know what the situation is exactly, but it seems like just anyone's out there, including this guy, who I didn't get up close, but he is pretending to play violin. Yeah, he's just miming. I took grade 7 when I was a kid. I promise you, this guy is not playing his instrument. See also, this guy pretending to play piano. Look, I know the Ukraine flags might make you say, give the guy a break. And I don't know him personally, but if he's gonna just keep half pretending to stroke a Casio to the recordings of the same 2 songs over and over, if he's not willing to be truthful about that, I feel like it does draw the truthfulness of his Ukrainian credentials into question. And if he is just using 2 Ukrainian flags to get a few extra sympathy euros, that's pretty messed up. I don't know, is there no rule enforcement around people dragging speakers out here and amplifying their busking? Or like this guy who put Sweet Home Alabama up to F sharp, completely pitching himself out, and somehow managed the entire thing without once singing a note of the actual melody. All this is to say, not sure exactly how much the police are cracking down in Rome, but it does appear not all that much. All I can really say is, however much you thought, yeah, I should probably see Rome at some time before I'm 60, I don't know, well, you need to see it even more than you realise. If you're completely unbothered by ancient history, well then, to be honest, I'm not your guy anyway, but I'm sure there's fancy hotels and restaurants and plenty for you to hide in and not see the place properly, but well, if you were in any doubt, Rome honestly is a history lover's dream. It's all there in incredible detail. So that was Rome, and now that our Italy playlist is properly getting going, I'm actually editing the last few bits of the script just after fulfilling a long-held ambition to get to both the very south of mainland Italy and Calabria, which was amazing, but also the ludicrous archaeology in the Bay of Naples. We're talking Pompeii, Herculaneum, Paestum, and way more. I was wondering to myself whether we just keep going and make those episodes right now, but we've got other things we're really overdue to make. As for next time, you might not know this, but counterintuitively, towards the end of the Roman Empire in the West, Rome was not the capital. By the 400s, the emperors had largely moved out of the Eternal City to a much smaller city that became the capital. This is Ravenna. This may be something you're familiar with, and I wasn't sure this trip was going to be an episode just yet, but then I realised we've just got to. So next time, there's some incredible stuff to show you, as well as other bits from around North Italy. If you've been enjoying the music in the background, that's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it all on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. As I say, find us on all the socials for more historic details as we go. You know, one day, all of this Roman stuff we've been filming, as well as all the Norman bits and Neolithic stuff, and just all of it is going to make some incredible history episodes. So I really hope you'll subscribe and stick around to when that happens. But in the meantime, we'll catch you very soon.